everybody. How we doing today? I hope you're having a great day. Thank you so much for joining me here in the Whole Elephant. Thank you to my guest last week, Bill Schnee. What an unbelievably fun time going through his career, and just an unbelievable, legendary career. That was a blast. Today, it's not darker. It's not somber. I guess it's a little less fun, maybe. But really interesting talk today with Dr. Brad Bursch. I really wanted, after this year of COVID, to get a perspective of what it was like for a doctor during these times. Brad is a pediatrician here in the area where I live, and I wanted to know what his perspective over the last year has been, and his perspective on, when webmd moms and internet search moms come in and have an opinion on stuff, how he deals with that sort of thing. And then I also wanted to dive into some spiritual things. How do we know that things are spiritual and not just brain function? Or does it even matter? Is it all coming from one God source anyway? And especially me as a person who's involved in the worship music side of things, I can manipulate through music how people are feeling. And that's always made me a little uneasy. Are we calling that the Holy Spirit? Are we calling that me manipulating music? Or are those, just gifts and things that God gives us, and it's all the same anyway? I wanted to get his perspective on that and see from his medical standpoint what he thinks. So sit back and relax and enjoy the chat. Dr. Bursch, what's up, man? Thanks for doing this. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Excited.
I have a hard time calling doctors and coaches by their first names.
You can call Brad but
I don't think I could. I would not feel comfortable doing that. Anyone who I've known as a doctor or a coach now, like Pastor Dave, I call Dave. I have no rep for Pastor Dave, but for you, Dr. Bursch, I feel like that's what I have to call you.
Well, I at first, there's some doctors who like to, call me by my first name, but I actually kind of like the Dr. Bursch because it helps with kids. So I don't mind it. I'm pretty used to that terminology.
So I've been thinking about you a lot this year. I can't imagine what the last year and a half or so has been like for you. Mm-hmm. I want to get into your background and how you became a doctor and all that, but just to start off, are you able to look back at this past year plus and put it into perspective at all?
Well, that's a good question. I hope that I can at some point in time. I don't know if I'm still a little bit in the trenches trying to navigate the business of medicine and navigate, patient care. But it is, January 2020, we saw things coming. But you thought, okay, oh man, this could actually be it. Because I'd done during the swine flu, that was a pretty busy time, but it didn't turn out to be like this, right? And then like that March 17th day, it's like everything fell apart. And so it was a challenge. But we have, as a partnership with my partners, we've worked well together. We're probably a better team of doctors now, a better group of co-owners and co-warriors. It feels like a battle, right? There's like ebbs and flows to the battle, right? You kind of you mount your attack and then you get pushed back and you have to rally your troops to go on again.
Right.
So I think that I will be stronger for it and probably wiser for it and humbled too. I think there's a lot of things to plan. But there's a lot you can't always control. A lot of things. So that definitely, that humbling is probably a helpful thing in life.
Pretty early on, we found out that kids weren't being affected as severely. Did that bring
very much
relief?
The truth? So honestly, the year for me has been a real challenging year of dealing with the reality of, we were seeing 40% of our normal volume, and when you lose 60% of your business, in a day, that is complicated in terms of workflow and business management. But we haven't had a lot of sick kids. Yes, there are sad stories of parents and grandparents, and I'm in medicine, so I I know a lot of those stories, but in my actual patients, there hasn't been a lot of catastrophes in terms of COVID,
Right.
and a direct to my patients. So it
Were people
hasn't.
were people just afraid to go to the doctor?
Oh yeah, basically they just were canceling it. I remember early on. I remember this one visit where the dad had his mask on and his eyes were just like crazy eyes. You know, you could just all you could see was his eyes because they had the mask, all their masks on, but his eyes were just like he knew he wanted to get his kids the shots, but he wasn't like totally uncomfortable being there. And it was, it was a time of fear, right? And unknowns, and it was that it was interesting to I hope that I was able to be part of making people feel more comfortable, confident. But it was the doctors would say, I don't know, maybe it seems like kids are okay out of China, we'll probably be okay, but we don't know. Usually they spread, though they actually didn't end up being as much of the spreaders as we thought they'd be. And then honestly, kids just haven't been sick this year. I mean, I think you have kids. I bet your daughter's been less sick this year than any
My
previous
whole
year.
family,
Right.
hasn't been sick. It's like maybe there's something to this distancing and wearing a
It's
mask.
really, I mean, in my own household, right? You don't have the stomach flu. My daughter, she
Yeah.
had the stomach flu before the performance, the 2019 performance of the musical, and she was just, well, the silver lining of COVID for her is no stomach flu this year.
Yeah.
And it's been true. I mean, there's been a lot less sick kids.
No, I mean, it was pretty much guaranteed that when she started going to preschool, when she went back to kindergarten, that like my whole household would get sick within
Right.
those first 2 weeks. Like it was guaranteed, we were ready for it. And she didn't go back to school, so we didn't get sick.
It really, it's a pretty surreal thing. I worry that January, February is going to be really crazy because there's going to be kids will get sick again once they get back together with other normal viruses. But there'll be a whole subset of parents whose kids haven't been sick, right? So they have an 18-month-old who's never been sick. And now their parents are going to freak out because they've never seen their kid tired and weak from a fever and the unknown. It'll be, I think it'll be a busy winter for me, not of COVID, but of everything else.
Right. I have always said that if there ever happens to be some kind of conspiracy theory that's true, that sneaks past the vast medical community, that that I'm gonna die because I just have, probably to a fault, a massive trust in doctors, and I don't have the time to go research and find out what's going on. That is not the case with everybody. And through this last year, there was a lot of, but have you seen this YouTube video? Have you read this Facebook post? How do you deal with that as a doctor, especially over this last year? But in general, you have parents coming in who spent 9 minutes on WebMD and whatnot. How do you deal with that as a doctor?
That's a great question. So early on in my career, I think I did a lot of not pontificating, but I would like try to explain studies and try to explain data and try to explain statistics. And I found that what's most powerful is my stories of my own children. So I sort of say, I have 2 kids, but I have 1,000. I treat every kid like they're mine, and you should do this. And so it's trying to build rapport quickly, to build trust quickly, so that I actually am a trusted voice. Because in the end, it's not so much of, I'm not going to convince the parent through this research study or that research study, because they don't trust that, because they've already been sort of like soured on the data. They're not going to, anything I say that's sort of scientific sounding will sort of be filtered in the thing of like, oh, he's part of the conspiracy, or he's duped. But if I share from my heart, and they kind of, or they see my authenticity of what I recommend, I think that gives me more power or more voice. Maybe that's a better word, in their house and in their mind. It can sometimes be very challenging because, I like to say I love them to it. But I'm not shy about my, I've sometimes, made references to that, that's bull, and then try to like, not like say the words because I'm a pediatrician, but basically really imply this is, that's false. And
Yeah.
I think I'm a bit colloquial in how I communicate with my parents. I like to think that I'm casual in how I communicate, but I'm not casual in how I think.
Mm,
And so my style is human with them, laughing at myself, getting peed on, getting pooped on, that whole thing. And
right.
but I carry with it, hopefully, some authority, but in a way that is accessible, maybe. But it's hard because there's things that you don't know, right? So this pandemic is like, I don't know, I don't know, I don't
Yeah.
know. And I'm actually more comfortable saying I don't know now, 15 years, 16 years in, than I was 15 years
Mm,
ago. I'm less like, well, I don't know what this is, but I think this, and 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 if you can kind of be, I don't know, confident in your I don't know, like
yeah.
that actually can sometimes help a parent. It's hard. They want that doctor to know all. But I do have a better understanding of statistics than they do, right? Mostly, and I do
Right.
have more experience in medicine than they do, and I have more knowledge about things. That's why they're coming to me,
Right.
and so I can hopefully interpret the data faster. And I was like, I sometimes with my teenage patients look at our screen time together, and I see these YouTube. They have YouTube, like hours of YouTube being spent. I have YouTube as well, but I'm actually listening to like I have my different people that were giving good information, more
Right.
like
Right. Right.
more scientific based and updates and stuff like that. And I have my set of things I could listen while I was driving in and or in the shower, and as I was trying to basically keep myself up to date on the different therapy options. And because even though I wasn't prescribing a lot for COVID, I had so many questions, so
Right.
many, it was, I mean, every day you're talking about, well, by now it's all about Dr. Bursch. What do we do now about travel? Do we go to, do we go to this thing in this state with this person, with this family member, this person's vaccinated, this person's anti-vaccine? I'm
Right.
always, they're asking me these questions where hard to answer. It's like,
Sure.
I don't know the future. I wish I was psychic because then that'd be helpful, right? But I'm not. So
Yeah.
therefore I have to make my best decision. And they ask me, so I'm going to give them an opinion. But a lot of the times it's not like I can really know.
Right, right. I mean, in pediatrics, you're dealing with vaccines all the time and questions about vaccines all the time. And then this one pops up. How do you try to fight misinformation in both those fronts? Is there just no way to do it? Some people aren't going to believe you anyway. You're just trying to give the best information out there and people can make their own choices. How do you go about doing that?
Well, there's three categories of people. There's people who are believers and they're excited and they're wanting it as soon as possible and they got their shots. The day their kid turns 2 months, the day the vaccine was available for them, they were getting the COVID shot.
Mm-hmm.
There's another subset that are for sure not, and they're don't believe in. They're like kind of everything is not, and those are you're not going to win those. But there is
Right,
a pretty large proportion where they're looking for information and they're scared because their good friend's kid had something that bad, and
right,
their friends convinced that it was from the shots, but even though it
right,
isn't.
right,
And I could go through why it's not causally related and cause it, correlated causation are different words,
right,
and I used, if you look at organic food use and the rate of autism has gone up, like organic food use has gone up, but that doesn't mean organic food eating has made autism increase. But if you
right.
look at those curves, it can look like the organic food caused autism. If
Some
you,
kind of false comparison. Yeah.
which is what they do with vaccines,
Got it.
but it's but it really comes down to they have a good friend whose kid has autism. Their good friend has something, and that family member is convinced it was something because they need an answer when they don't have like a concrete, oh, this is why this happened.
Right,
um,
right.
and so then there's that voice, but they also sort of understand that there's a lot of misinformation, and so they're looking for like that. I'm not sure if it's the tiebreaker or just they're nervous, they're scared, they want their child hurt. um,
Sure.
and if you can come at them with compassion but with confidence, there's many times that we can bring them to it. And then as you come to it, they will over time, come to it. If they're not going to, that it won't in the end be a very good fit. They'll probably end up moving away from my practice just because it'd be hard. It becomes a hard trust thing.
Right.
They don't.
Well, and that's the thing though. I mean, you can find a doctor who
Mhm.
will agree with you on that, right? I mean, there are
Right.
doctors that would
There
agree with
is,
you.
and there's
And
some misinformation out there. There's some that made a lot of money on books written and a lot of money made. And it's sadly, that's sadly, I think some of their motivation, even if it's not conscious, it's subconscious. So that is a challenge, I guess, in the conversation, but it is still, um, I'd say to them like, hey, you want me to have conversations that are hard for you. My role is an advocate for your child. And
yeah,
so that's your role too. I make the joke is it will always work better if there's two MDs in the room, medical doctor and mom dar. Mom radar is, as a physician, I should hear what mom is saying, or dad too, but mom dar's a better joke. But the two MDs working together will get the best care for your child, right? So
right.
the mom's instincts, the mom's assessment, because she might not be able to define why she's worried about her kid,
Yeah,
but she's noticing 1,000 different things, and she might not be able to
totally.
articulate what those are, but she knows that she's not right or he's not right. And if it's a foolish physician who doesn't listen to that.
Right.
That said, I also carry with it more information or more experience in this realm. And so then I also need to advocate for her child.
Right.
Even if it means having an awkward conversation. And
Right.
and so it can be. Now when there is someone who's like kind of like rude and just throwing, like, there's times I can get like heated or like, feel attacked, and
Yeah.
that I need it. If I can hold on to myself and stay present, I'll do better than if I get emotional. Like I'm emotional, like in a positive way, but if I get like defensive or angry, or that's that doesn't ever go well.
Right.
So it's hard not to though sometimes.
So take me back to medical school when you decided you wanted to be a doctor. Was pediatrics always at the forefront of your mind? Because I'm always interested, how is everyone at med school, and you go, you know what, I think kids, and the guy next to you is like, you know what, I'm thinking feet. Like
Yeah,
how does how
that's
does that
great.
happen?
That's a good question, and it's sometimes it's almost like who you get exposed to and how you go through your life, and sometimes it's not always. It might be just who you end up who you get connected to. But
Right.
when I was 4, I had surgery in a hospital, and I had to stay overnight before the surgery and went home not the day of the surgery, but the next day, because it's like,
Mm,
versus the surgery, we go home from like same day now.
right.
I was staying in the hospital overnight without my parents in a room of 8 kids. But it was the 70s, and there's this cool thing. You could press a button and they bring you chocolate pudding. And they had this thing, they could change the channel on the TV. That was my own TV on the ceiling. I could change the channel from my bed. It was
Yeah.
like mind blowing. And I thought, I want to be at a hospital. This is awesome. Maybe it was the middle child of me having control of the remote. But from that point, I would say I want to be a pediatrician because that's the only doctor I knew was a pediatrician. But by the time I went to med school, I thought, you know what, let's do family practice or some, I want to see all types of patients. So I went to med school thinking family practice, and maybe in 3 weeks decided, no, I don't want to be a family practitioner. So I thought internal medicine, which is adult doctor, but not, so I wanted a little more specific than just everyone, like a family practitioner might do. I wanted to be adult doctor. But I knew pediatrics might be a possibility, but I tried to set it up so I could do pediatrics soon enough in my 3rd year when I actually experienced it to see if it was something I wanted, but I ended up not getting the schedule I wanted. So I had pediatrics pretty late in my 3rd year.
Mm.
And I'd set up my whole 4th year for internal medicine. So my different rotations, my electives, that kind of stuff. And then I did pediatrics late in my 3rd year. And I came home happy. Like I was happy going into work, it was my people. Like it
Right.
was, an ER doctor had a throwaway line. You have a pediatrician's face. I don't know if he was just throwing it away. Like he was like, he might have, because I saw him like once, right? I interacted with him for like 1 hour, right? But he had the line that stuck in my head. You have a pediatrician's face, and it probably was because I was like wrestling with my self-concept of like, oh, because I did very well in medical school, and people were like, oh, you'll be bored in pediatrics. That's what people's thoughts were. But
Right.
that was silly. Really, it's who you want to be with,
Sure.
as your colleagues, and what kind of patients you want to be with. You're only bored if you're not thinking. And so it was late, but I still wrestled with it. And so I decided, it was like September 7th of my fourth year, which if you talk to a med student, that's super late
Right.
to decide. I had made, I basically, I had like letters of recommendation on internal medicine and I had letter recommendations on pediatrics because I had to turn in my application in September for residency. I had to decide, and I was walking my friend's dog on like a elective in Davis, and I basically had, I was praying, wrestling with it, and I kind of had like an epiphany, like, no, this is what you want to, this is who you want to be, this is what you want to do. It doesn't matter what other people think. What do
Right.
you want to do, Brad? I want to be a pediatrician. And then I just was all in. And it was like, it was really I wrestled and struggled, but mostly because I was thinking about other people. I had to come down to my own voice and, came back to that. It wasn't about getting chocolate pudding. It was, I just wanted to be, I'm suited to it. I don't take myself seriously. I laugh at myself a lot. You
Right.
got to be able, you get peed on, you get pooped on, like you get this is the reality of the pediatrician, especially general
Right.
pediatrician's life. And so it was so I guess it came down to who you want to be with and how you do that. I think that's your best way. But it becomes it becomes hard because your friends, you had friends who wanted, I had a friend who wanted to be a surgeon, but then he didn't want, he got into it, didn't like it,
Right.
and so then he changed to be a pathologist, which is a very different life.
Yeah.
Another friend who was family practitioner decided he didn't like, he wanted to be a surgeon, so he didn't, doing that. It's hard because there's some cost to trying to shift.
Right. Right. At what point did you know going into it, or was there a moment when you realized when you go into pediatrics, when something goes wrong, it's a tragedy? There's no, well, this went wrong, but he was 85 and he lived a good life. When something goes wrong, it goes really wrong. Was there a
Right.
moment that you realized that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I trained at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. So in med school, I didn't have really. Well, actually, there was a couple moments in med school, but I was probably still in the med student role of like, I didn't have as much ownership. There
Mm-hmm.
was some sad stories I could share, but not. But I think more like at Children's Hospital, there's a lot of sad stories, right?
Yeah.
And there are, especially as I became a second and third year, I was more like higher up, making more decisions, more important in the care of each patient, maybe as a senior resident. Um, you start to, you're there all night, you're there all long, long hours. And so you really connect to families. And then you have a dad who's deciding to take his child home for hospice. And I remember, it's kind of, it was a kind of a big decision, but we made it in the hallway of the floor. And, but it taken a while to get there, but I just want to take him home. And it's a hard thing to say, okay, to help a family go to where they're going to let their child who had terrible cancer and
Yeah.
kidneys were out of his body, and it's just very sick kid and just brutal reality. But then to be the one then to call the attending in to like kind of have it happen. Or another sad story, a baby had like a bad thing as it was like born with it, and it'd be to be the one in the room where mom decides to withdraw support, and to be the, that was like the gravity of child dying is catastrophe.
Right.
And it's I I think that if I didn't have faith, I don't know how my colleagues who don't deal with it.
Yeah.
Because it comes down to is I have to have faith in something higher, that there's injustice, that there's in the end things are made right. There's plenty of things that are not good. There's
Yeah.
plenty of things that are really brutal, and I don't have an answer for children
Right.
dying tragically and drowning or cancer or
And I
whatever.
mean, I can tell just from the way you're talking about it, you don't become numb to it. It still affects you. And
Yeah.
I kind of have this happen, working at the church. I do so many funerals,
Right.
so many. And I don't think I've become numb to death and people dying and the tragedy of that and being with people, but it certainly, I think, has given me a perspective on it, that, it's not a shock that people die. I have
Right.
a very, have those things given you a different perspective on death? Not that you've become numb to it, but you understand it in a different way than maybe some people do.
I that's a good question. It's hard to know how other people understand it. I know that sadly I've had, patient die not that long ago, and I still cried. And I when I was talking with his mom, and what do you say?
Yeah.
I don't know what you say. I am a person, because I am of a certain role, I actually have things to say, like I'm trying to help them through it. Um, but it is, but maybe that because I have gone through it before, I have come through it with families before, maybe that gives me some strength, that leads to some stability to them. I hope that I'm a voice of hope and a voice of peace and love.
Right.
I don't use, can't really use faith terminology, I guess, when you're talking to patients and stuff, but it is, but I think but I'm authentic in my
Right.
care.
Right.
I don't want to be the doctor who's closed off. There's plenty of people who do, because it becomes brutal, right? There's a defense, but I'd rather stay soft and cry
Right.
than become hardened and callous, or not callous. I don't sound like my friends are callous. It just, there's a protection that sometimes you have to put up.
Sure. Sure. You mentioned your faith, God, faith, spirituality, however that's looked to you. When did that start? Is it something you grew up with? What does your faith life look like?
That's an interesting. It's related to my medicine as well, actually. So I grew up in a church, going to church, but it's funny. I would if you'd asked me, are you a Christian? I would say I was a Christian till maybe 3 months before I was a Christian. So like
Right.
I grew up going to a church, and I was involved a little bit in the youth group, and had some community, but I wasn't a person of faith. I went to college, and my roommate and he was involved with the Christian fellowship there, and he was a very engaging man and good friend. And basically I started hanging out with people, and I'd play basketball with them. They'd have a Bible study in our room. I'd go watch 90210, and then the 90210 would end, and we all go play basketball together. And so I just had a community of guys that I was getting to know that were people of faith, and
Right.
it was attractive. And so I started investigating, I guess, became, seeking more. And by the end of my freshman year, I came to faith. And of course I came to faith right at the end of my freshman year, and then went home and was just like, I don't know what the heck would I do in college, and then I came back really doubting my thoughts. But then I kind of, I think that was helpful. Like, it was a journey. It's not like one day you become a faith and everything's figured out. There's a whole lot more to be done. But
Right.
it was interesting.
Is it weird for you? And was there ever a part in your journey? I mean, you deal day to day in empirical evidence,
Mhm.
and that's what you go off of for your job. That this is a non-empirical evidence type of
Right.
faith. Are those in conflict in your brain?
It was very challenging, because I was, I'm 19, science major, and I'm at college, and I'm, pride myself on my thinking and my ability to, scientific brain and stuff. And so I had all this evidence of life change. So my friend Matt life was different. He was a different human and than what I knew. And either, I mean, I knew him well, so I knew all his faults as well. So it wasn't like I had this false sense of who he was. He was my roommate. I mean,
Yeah.
but there was attractiveness to him. And so then as I engaged faith, I engaged the teachings of Jesus. As I engaged, it was a lot of intellectual, and so it became almost like spoiled for the world. I realized that the world didn't have what I wanted, but then I also couldn't come to grips with how do I navigate things like how does the world begin, and how does this work, and how does this
Yeah.
scientifically work, and how does the Bible doesn't really fit for a scientific text. And honestly, I don't know all those answers. It came down to where I knew enough, and I stepped into faith, even though I basically chose to say I don't know. And that sounds like, oh, that must be ethic. That's like intellectually unsound. It's not actually true. It is intellectually sound, because even in medicine, you make a decision about this treatment for COVID because it has enough information, but there are times that it ends up becoming proven wrong, so,
Right.
or whatever. It becomes, it even proven is a complicated term because it's multifactorial, but it's definitely, it was a real challenge for me, because also I want to be a doctor before I want I came into faith. And so then I kind of pursued, I was becoming a doctor, but it was sort of outside my faith. I was also pursuing faith, but I was pursuing a doctor, and I wasn't maybe whole. I was almost sort of like dichotomous. I was like divided until
Right.
I didn't get into med school. I applied my first year and didn't get in.
Right.
And so I was like, so much of my worth was wrapped up into my success in school, my success as a physician, as a pre-med, as a good student. And then I was just like laid flat. So I like to think I became a Christian in first year of college, but I became a Christian for life the end of my senior year, when I basically had to face the reality of what makes me worth something. Where's my
Yeah. I mean,
self-worth?
I think I'm kind of a different kind of worship leader, because I like crave the intellectual side, the empirical side, all that stuff. And I don't get as I don't get as fired up about the emotional stuff, which like that's literally like my job is to create that emotional side of it. But I crave understanding how it works. I want to, just like I want to know how the human body works, I want to know how God works. And I was just reading, the story of the woman who reaches out and touches Jesus, and then
Right.
she's healed, and he says, your faith has healed you. And what you want to say is, well, the woman had faith, so she was healed. And then in your line of work, that's not always true, that's not a universal truth. You can't just have the most faith out of the people in the group and have your kid healed. And do you struggle with those sorts of thoughts, with reading those stories and then applying it to real life? How has that journey been for you?
Yeah, that is hard. So I too, actually, I'm still an intellectual, right? So I still, while I had to make choices to like, I don't know how all things work, but I still believe in God. I still desire to know. I really appreciate like the details of like understanding why this, or the the not just the biblical backing for the resurrection, but the like intellectual backing for the resurrection, and why the testimonies are powerful and important, and a historical document matter to me, in terms of my faith. But it is hard. Like, I remember in children's, there was a family decided to stop chemo and do prayer over their child, and she died. And, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
Right. So I have colleagues who are like judging this family for choosing prayer, but then, and as honestly, I did as well, because I was like, God can work through chemo as well.
Right.
Um, though I do think I have been part of miraculous things, but they're maybe not as like the script, not as obvious as um as a woman bleeding for 20 years suddenly not
Yeah.
bleeding.
Yeah.
So that is, I think that is a challenge, because it's like, well, what does that look like? Because I have been made a person to care about medicine, and so I will prescribe antibiotics appropriately, and guide someone to the help that they need, hopefully, if it's a specialist that they need, and give wise counsel about what to do in hard situations, and oftentimes easy situations.
Right.
And that's still God working, because he's working through me in that. Um,
Right.
but I also like, wow, it'd be nice to be able to like cast out that demon of the kid who's really struggling, because there's a lot of kids struggling right now emotionally, and what is a demon, what
Yeah.
is the kid who's having a hard time, like that's a complicated I don't know. I
Well,
try to
we're
I
we're
don't even know how to
reading.
go. It gets I get
Yeah, I
stuck.
mean, we're reading texts.
Mhm.
Obviously, we're reading texts that the medical community has advanced far beyond.
Right.
So certainly we can say when we read something, we can go, was this person demon possessed or did they have schizophrenia? Like we've attached scientific terms to terms they didn't have back then, right? But I often I think about this even sometimes. Wow, this is a confession. I think about this sometimes even in the middle of a worship set,
Right.
right? I think all the time, is is there an external force of that we call the Holy Spirit or whatever acting upon me, or
Mhm.
am I manipulating everyone's brain function in the room? Right? Because there are certain little tricks you can do with the worship music
Mhm.
to elicit emotion, to draw that, if I was at an EDM concert, someone would say, wow, this DJ is really good at hyping up the room.
Right.
Well, am I just good at hyping up the room, or is there the Holy Spirit interacting with everybody? Because functionally, we're doing kind of the same tricks. And you know what I mean? Like, as a
Yeah,
doctor,
totally
is there
get
an
it.
external force or is it just brain function that we're manipulating?
I mean, it's a bit difficult to know, right? Because yeah, probably yes to both, right? So it's
Yeah.
a bit of yes. I mean, it's probably yes. There are times that you are just phoning it in of sorts. Not phoning in is the wrong word, but you are using the tools in a way that there's other times that why did you choose to do that way that time? You could argue the Holy Spirit might have led you in that, right? Or
Sure.
in me, like in am I, because I'm a loud kid person making jokes and doing high fives and knuckles with the kids, that I create a community and a point of comfort that is because I have techniques of how to win the family and win the kid in the room. For me, it's like I need to win the family, right? I need to win
Right.
that
Right.
mom, win that dad, win that kid, because I can't make them, a lot of those, because I can't make them sit still. But if I can win them and relax them, I'm going to be more successful in the visit. Also, I'm going to create that trust that I talked about. And so there's definitely times that I am using the skills that I have honed over time to
Right.
win people over. But then there's also times where it is me phoning it in. I guess it's phone is the wrong word. I need to think of different phrasing, but like I'm stuck in my head. But like, there's times I'm probably doing it more of my own. But I do think there's times where I'm just trying to be authentic to myself.
Right.
And I don't, and it, I could just be authentic to myself. I don't know if I really know. I mean, I am very interested in brain science. And I talked a few years ago, I mean, how your brain's developing as an adolescent and our neural connections and what you're focused on impacts what it is. And if you look at scripture, there's plenty of evidence that God knew that too, right?
Right.
What to dwell on, what to focus on. And there is, actually, but even if you look at just regular psychology, looking at like, positive thinking of sorts, where you start to dwell on gratitude rather than dwell on the negatives,
Sure.
or you have a
Sure.
bias to negativity, to remember negativity because we want to survive, right? You don't want to get in a car crash because you only get one of those. You don't get multiple of those. And so you have to
Right.
be biased a bit towards negativity, but our brains benefit from us seeping and dwelling in some of that positivity. So it happens for me too, and I get it for you, I'm sure, but I don't know if we have to like. I sometimes I'm like, well, do I need to? I just need to try and keep going, and do I
Yeah.
really need to like? I think I should like be self-aware, right? Because being self-aware will help me be healthier as a human. But there are also sometimes where there's a work to be done, and
Right.
your job is to engage people in worship, and my job is to try to help people get better.
Totally. I just struggle
Yeah.
with trying to interpret the texts
Right.
and understanding, did they call this a spirit because they didn't understand brain function the way we do now? Either because either way, I think it's of God. Either
Right.
way. I mean, either way, I'm either saying there's a spirit presence in the room that's doing this, or God made us this way, and this is one way we connect to the divine. Either way, I just want to know how it works. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and I don't think it's anything that we can define or necessarily say, but it's the stuff that keeps me up at night because I just long to know how it works.
I mean, and so we should keep pursuing, right? So
Yeah.
if God is true, he can handle us questioning, right? He can handle
Yeah.
us wondering. He can handle all that. Like we
Right.
don't need to be afraid to use our brains. We don't need to
That's
be
literally
afraid.
the entire point of my entire podcast is
We
I
don't we
just
don't
feel like
need to
there was
be
a
afraid.
fear of to ask questions and I
Yeah,
don't want to live in that fear.
right. We don't need to. If it's true, it's true, and it will hold up. We might not understand it. We might like get by our own cognitive biases and our own confirmation biases that we all run through, even when we know about it and we still do it. But if it is true, it is true, and so therefore it can hold up. And I don't know. I have many, like, that person's seizing. That's a seizure.
Right.
They're having a seizure. Is that really a demon? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I've also had enough evidence of things I cannot explain
Sure.
that I say I think Western medicine can get sometimes arrogant,
Mm.
and there are things that we cannot explain,
Yeah.
and we better off to like stay humble.
Yeah. No, that makes
Context.
sense. So we are approaching, well, this podcast will have been released past the June 15th deadline, but as we record this right now, we're approaching this June 15th number. We don't really know exactly what it means, but it kind of at least signifies progress. Are you hopeful for where we're headed? And do you see kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, or are we in this for a long haul?
Well, I get asked that question every day, and it's hard because I don't have the data that Barbara Ferrer does, or Fauci does. I don't have like the large scale trajectory data. I mean, I look online and World Meter and check the numbers. It's like sometimes I almost check too much, but so I think that the reality is we have the least amount of cases we've had since March of 2020, and there
Right.
is less than 3% of tests done in the LA area are positive. There is enough evidence that there's a lot less disease here that likely we are not going to have a lot of COVID this summer. And I don't think we're going to blow up even as we go into more community. As we get to the fall, if there might be some risk for a resurgence in the fall, because we had a lot of people sick in January, February, and really the disease itself creates some immunity, and it's going to last probably 3 to 6 months. The vaccine is likely better at creating immunity than illness. So if you get the disease, you're more likely to get it again than the person who gets the shot. That's as best I can tell. So I think we're going to stall out on vaccinations. There's a subset of people they just are not going to look at for any other information. They've decided, and unless we have a bad surge in their hometown, they're not going to get a shot. Which is sad, because that to me honestly would be the thing that continues to make the fall less likely to flare.
Right.
I think it's not going to flare in the fall. I think United States is going to be okay. I think we are going to have a better summer. But we all are sort of like, even as a person myself, do I go on that trip? I don't really want to go to a restaurant to eat right now. I don't want to.
Right.
So therefore, if I don't want to, why don't I want to? I'm telling you can go. Just on this podcast, I'm telling how many people listen to it. It's probably okay,
Right.
But I myself emotionally don't want to, because there's like, I was careful, I wear a mask. I'm somewhat still like, am I just being foolish about being careful about play dates for my kids still, or am I being foolish that I'm not going out and taking advantage of the opportunities that are in front of me, cheaper plane tickets or something like? And I don't know. Actually, I haven't felt comfortable to fly. But now it's probably okay. It's not like June 15th is a magical day. It's just that's just when the governor decided to let things fly.
Right.
But Memorial Day, people were together more, and there will be surge by June 15th. And if we don't surge from Memorial Day and we don't surge from 4th of July, I bet like July 20th, if you get to July 20th, we've had opening from 15th, 4th of July where people were together.
Right.
We don't see a surge in later July.
Right. Well, July 21st is my birthday, so we'll have a huge rager if we're good by July 20th. And the next day, huge rager at my house.
Yeah.
Man, I appreciate you doing this, taking the time. Thank you so much for doing this. I hope that the story, it's not going to be everyone, but I hope we just like go forward with grace, because there are going to be people that wear masks years from now. Yeah. And I hope we just look at them and go, hey, that's your choice. Good on you. If that makes you feel comfortable, that makes you feel comfortable. I'm just tired of the fight of it.
Man,
that's what I'm tired of.
I think that we all could use a bit of humbleness, a bit of like graciousness, and be like, we're trying to get through together. Let's be, honestly, if anything, like us, we need community. People need other people. And the lack of community has been just, as a pediatrician, my heart breaks for the kids who are just, there's a lot of struggle, and just because they're in that age of development, right? And so then they have this impact of their development where it's sort of like could shape a generation, it might, instead of Gen X and millennial and Gen Z, it'll be like the COVID generation or something. I don't know. I should like trademark some name that's cool.
Gen quarantine, Gen mask.
Because it'd be like the mask gen or something. Like it'd be. Yeah. Well, I wonder what will that do long term for us as a society? Because adolescents drive change in society because their brains are naturally prone to underestimate risk, overestimate benefit. They tend to like take chances, but there's a whole generation that sort of like had that like tamped down. And so will our society change as it should? Because we already were having this sort of like sheltered adolescence, and therefore there isn't as much, but that there's risk, but it also drives change, and it brings hope, and like they're able to like say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this because this is right. And I'm going to, well, I'm like afraid of like losing my house, I'm afraid of, like, the negative things.
Right. Well, man, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for doing this. And, I'll be on your doorstep if I ever have a weird rash that I need someone to look at.
Sadly, I've had that actually happen. So
I bet every doctor who's ever been a doctor has had that happen.
And sometimes it's in inappropriate locations too. So
absolutely.
Try to avoid that. Okay.
All right. Thanks, man. I appreciate you.
Take care.